I remember the smell of old wood and stale beer, the way it clung to the air in the small, dimly lit restaurant. The walls were covered in peeling wallpaper, faded from years of whiskey-soaked laughter and heated arguments. It was never quiet there, not even in the early hours of the morning when the last customers trickled out, leaving the bar to settle into a heavy silence. Growing up in that world taught me things I never wanted to know. My family owned and ran one of the few businesses in our small town, a combination bar and restaurant that served as a gathering place for everyone, from local businessmen to couples hoping to escape the monotony of their lives. But as a child, I didn't understand that this place, my father's pride and joy, was built on secrets. My father never said much, but his presence was enough. He was a giant, both in stature and in the way he carried himself, always quiet but with a kind of unspoken authority that made people listen. My mother was softer, her hands always busy with the books, keeping track of everything. But I never saw her smile the way she did when she greeted the regulars. Her eyes, when they met theirs, softened. But I knew better than to ask why. Some things, like the customers' whispers or the hushed laughter in the corner booths, weren't meant to be understood by children. I was 15 when I first began working at the restaurant, officially anyway. My older brother, Aaron, had been there for a few years, already taking charge of the bar. My sister, Jessica, had just started college, but I was still too young to do much. My father, despite the long hours he spent behind the bar, was strict about what I could see, what I could hear, what I could know. He said that it was part of the job, part of the family business, but the truth was, I think he wanted to protect us. There was too much going on behind the scenes. I wasn't supposed to work the bar, but my father let me wait tables in the restaurant. I hated it at first. I wanted to hang out with friends, not serve food to strangers who didn't even notice I was there. But then, I started seeing things I couldn't forget, things I was never meant to see. One evening, I watched a woman, dressed in a little black dress, sit down with a man who wasn't her husband. Their conversation started as polite, casual chatter, but it quickly became something else. He leaned in, she laughed too loudly, her fingers brushed his arm. I caught a glimpse of their hands and then my eyes darted away. I wasn't supposed to be watching. I felt a hand on my shoulder, and before I could react, my father's voice came, low and serious. "Don't watch that, son, and don't talk about it either." I knew then, in that moment, what kind of world I was part of. A world where secrets were currency, where loyalty was a fragile thing, and where innocence didn't stand a chance. I remember my father's words clearly as he took me into the back office later that night. "What happens here stays here," he said. "We keep our eyes and ears to ourselves. If you see something that doesn't belong, you turn away. We don't gossip, we don't judge. We just keep our business running." But it wasn't just about discretion. It was about survival. I was learning early that the world wasn't as simple as I thought. The people who came to our restaurant and bar, they weren't just looking for a meal or a drink. They were looking for something more, and that something wasn't always innocent. As the years went by, I began to realize the truth. Infidelity, secrets, and lies were everywhere, hiding in plain sight. And that was the foundation of my view on relationships, the foundation I carried with me into adulthood. My world was built on a lie. For years, Emily and I were the picture of a perfect couple. Our friends envied us, our families admired us, and even strangers seemed to sense the bond we shared. We had a rhythm, a quiet understanding that kept us moving forward. We were partners in everything, business, life, and love. I thought we'd built something unshakable, something that no one, not even time, could tear apart. Emily was ambitious, fiercely driven in her career, but it was something I admired. Her success didn't feel like a threat to me. It felt like a shared victory. I supported her every step of the way, watching her climb the corporate ladder, always proud. But as she moved up, her work began to pull her further from home. The business trips, the late nights, the emails sent at all hours of the day. I understood, of course. She was on her way to the top, and I was right there cheering her on. But somewhere along the way, I started to feel a shift. Small things, minor, insignificant things that I tried to ignore. At first, it was the long hours at the office. Then it was the trips that seemed to happen more frequently. She was always busy, and I always told myself it was temporary. After all, we were building a future together. Still, there was something inside me that whispered I wasn't enough, that I couldn't be everything she needed. I told myself it was paranoia, the kind of doubt I had carried with me since my childhood. I never let it show. I didn't want to be that person, the jealous, insecure spouse. But every time she stepped out the door, every time she left for another business trip, that whisper grew louder. I loved Emily. I believed in us. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something, somewhere, was changing. It was subtle at first. A shift in the way we communicated, the way she seemed distant when she was home. But we still shared laughter, still held hands in public, still kissed before bed. I wanted to believe it was nothing, that the perfect marriage we had built would carry us through anything. But deep down, I knew that something wasn't right. I just couldn't put my finger on it yet. It started with a simple text. I was in a meeting at the office, the kind of day where every minute felt like it mattered. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and for a moment I thought about ignoring it. But something nudged me to check it, maybe just to put my mind at ease. It was Emily. "The 4 of us are having drinks. I'll be home late tonight. Love you," the message read. I had learned to give her space, to let her have her own life outside of work and home. But that message didn't sit right with me. She always kept me in the loop, always let me know her plans. It was almost like she was distancing herself this time, the words feeling just a bit too rehearsed, too safe. I pushed it aside. "It's nothing," I told myself. "She's just out with friends." But when she came home that night, it wasn't the usual greeting. Normally, she'd tell me about her night, share a laugh about something silly. But this time, she walked in quietly, her eyes avoiding mine, her movements stiff. I pretended not to notice. After all, this was Emily, my Emily. She didn't keep secrets. Still, that seed of doubt had been planted. I found myself watching her a little closer, listening to her voice for any signs that didn't match the melody I had known for years. It was like I was hearing her for the first time, trying to find meaning in her every word. The next few days felt different. The conversations were shorter, the laughs a little more forced. I tried to dismiss it, telling myself that work was just overwhelming her. But every time she left, that whisper inside me grew louder, telling me something wasn't right. It was a small thing, a glance that didn't reach her eyes, a smile that didn't feel warm. But I couldn't ignore it anymore. One evening, after Emily left for yet another late-night work event, I sat in the silence of our living room, staring at the empty space beside me. This was my life, right? This was the perfect marriage I had worked so hard to build. But now, with every passing day, the cracks were starting to show. I didn't want to admit it, but I could feel them. And with those cracks came the first pangs of fear. Fear that the foundation I had trusted so completely wasn't as solid as I thought. Was I losing her? And worse, had I ever really known her at all? The doubt gnawed at me, a constant presence in the back of my mind. I tried to push it away, to convince myself I was overreacting, that Emily was just busy with work. But the silence in our home, the distance between us, spoke louder than any excuse I could make. I knew I had to face the truth, even if it shattered everything I believed in. That night, after Emily left for yet another late-night event, I sat in the living room, staring at the empty space beside me. The soft hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the house. I could hear my heart pounding in my chest, the weight of the decision pressing down on me. I couldn't ignore it any longer. The signs were there, small at first, but now they were impossible to deny. The texts that didn't sit right, the way she avoided my gaze, the time spent away from home. I wasn't stupid. I had seen enough of the world to recognize when something wasn't right. I picked up my phone, fingers trembling as I scrolled through the contacts. I had never thought I'd be in this situation, but desperation had a way of pushing you to places you never thought you'd go. I dialed the number of a private investigator. I couldn't do this on my own. I needed to know. The phone rang 3 times before a voice answered. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach as I introduced myself, explained the situation in a voice that barely held together. "I need help. I said, my voice strained. "I need to know the truth." The investigator promised to start immediately. My heart raced as I hung up the phone. I had crossed a line, but in that moment I didn't care. I had to know. I couldn't live with the uncertainty anymore. I told myself I was doing this for us, for the marriage we built, for the family we'd created. But deep down, I knew the truth. I wasn't doing it for us anymore. I was doing it for me, for the man I used to be before doubt and betrayal clouded everything. The first report came a week after I made the call. My hands trembled as I opened the email, the subject line reading, "Initial findings, private investigation." My breath caught in my throat. I had known what I was getting myself into, but seeing it in black and white made it real, made it undeniable. I read through the details quickly at first, the words blurring together as my heart pounded. But one sentence stood out. On multiple occasions, Emily was seen meeting with a man at various hotels across the city. My stomach twisted. The room felt too small, the walls closing in. I had always suspected, but this was different. This was proof. The investigator had followed Emily to several locations, taking photos and documenting the times. There were pictures of her entering and leaving a hotel, and there was another man with her, someone I didn't recognize. It wasn't just a dinner, it wasn't just a late-night meeting. It was something more. I felt the weight of the discovery sinking in. There was no way to deny it now. My mind raced, desperately trying to make sense of what I was seeing. My wife, the woman I had trusted more than anyone, the woman I had built my entire life with. How could this be happening? My hands shook as I scrolled down to more details. They met at least 3 times over the last month. Each meeting seemed to grow more intimate, more involved. My worst fears were coming to life. It wasn't just an innocent meeting, they were spending hours together. I wanted to confront her immediately, to demand answers. But I stopped myself. What would I even say? The truth was too raw, too painful. I wasn't ready to face it yet. I just sat there, the photos burned into my mind, trying to hold on to the remnants of the life I had believed in. I never meant to eavesdrop, but that night when Emily stepped out to take a call, something in me snapped. I had been living in this whirlwind of doubt for weeks, but tonight felt different. I wasn't sure what I expected to hear, maybe a clue, maybe a simple answer that would quiet the storm inside me. What I didn't expect was the quiet tension in her voice. I was sitting in the kitchen, pretending to read through some papers when I heard her voice. It was softer than usual, almost hesitant. Her words were low, too low to make out, but I could hear the edge in her tone. I focused in, straining to catch the faintest fragment. I made out a few words. "I'll be there soon. Just a little longer. It'll be fine." I froze, my heart hammering. Her tone was familiar. It wasn't the voice she used when she was with me. It wasn't the voice she used when she was talking to a colleague. No, this was something different, something intimate. She laughed, a sound that didn't belong, not here, not in this house. It was a light, breathy laugh, the kind I hadn't heard from her in months. My stomach twisted, and then I heard it. A name. "I miss you too, Steve." My heart dropped into my stomach. My hand, still gripping the papers, went cold. That name, Steve, echoed through my mind. I had heard it before. I didn't need to be told who he was. It hit me like a punch to the chest. I had been fooling myself for so long, trying to explain away the distance, the late nights, the sudden shifts. But now, with those words, everything crashed down around me. I tried to breathe, tried to steady myself, but the room felt smaller, the air thicker. I couldn't move, couldn't think. I was paralyzed, trapped in the knowledge that I was losing her, losing everything I thought I understood about us. I didn't want to confront her, not yet. I wasn't ready, but I knew deep down that the moment I heard her say that name, nothing would ever be the same again. I had hoped the evidence would remain blurry, that I could convince myself it was all just a misunderstanding. But the truth doesn't work like that, does it? It never stays hidden, not for long. The investigator's report hit me like a freight train, shattering what little was left of the facade I'd tried to hold up. The email arrived just before dinner. I didn't want to open it. I knew I couldn't face it, but I did. I clicked on the attachment with trembling fingers, the screen bright in the dim light of our living room. The first thing I saw was the date, March 3rd. Then the time, 8:45 p.m. There was Emily, stepping out of a sleek black car. Her face was turned away, but I recognized her in an instant. She was meeting him, meeting Steve, the man I had never met but who I now felt I knew far too well. The photos weren't taken from across the street or through a window. They were up close, too close. I could see the nervous look on Emily's face as she checked her phone, and the way Steve stood too casually, too confidently, his arm brushing against her back as they entered the hotel. My stomach turned. The investigator had followed them for hours. They went in separately, but the keycard swipe at the front desk was the same. Room 415. The images were clear, the details undeniable. It wasn't a work meeting. It wasn't an innocent dinner. It was something else, something that felt like betrayal in its purest form. I wanted to scream, to throw my phone against the wall, to ask why and how. But I didn't. I just sat there, staring at the screen, feeling the cold weight of reality settle over me. Emily, my Emily, had been lying, had been hiding something from me, and worse, I had seen it coming. This wasn't the first sign. It wasn't the first time I'd questioned her. But now, with these photos, with this irrefutable evidence, there was no turning back. I could hear the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the only sound in the house that night. My pulse was louder, though, thundering in my ears, drowning out everything else. The evidence was clear now, undeniable, raw. My mind had been racing for hours, replaying every moment, every word, until my thoughts became a blur. But now, there was no escaping it. I had to face her. I had to confront Emily. She came home late, just like always. I could hear the soft click of the door behind her as she entered, the sound of her heels against the hardwood floor. She called out to me, her voice light, almost casual, as if nothing had changed. "Hey, love, I'm home." But I couldn't respond. I couldn't say anything. The words were lodged in my throat, thick with everything I had been holding back. I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of everything I had been avoiding. I wasn't sure if I was ready for this, but I had no choice. When she saw me standing there, she froze for a moment. A flicker of confusion passed over her face, but she quickly masked it with a smile. "What's going on? You look serious." I didn't say anything at first. I just stared at her, trying to piece together the woman who stood before me, the woman I had loved for so long, but all I could see now was the distance, the lies that hung in the air like an unspoken truth. "I know," I said, my voice shaking but steady enough to be heard. "I know what's been going on, Emily." Her smile faltered for a second, but it quickly returned. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice too calm, too rehearsed. I couldn't hold it in anymore. The pictures, the calls, the name, it all poured out of me in a rush. "I know about Steve. I saw the photos, the hotel rooms. I know everything." For a moment she didn't speak. Her face went pale, her lips parted, but no words came out. It felt like time had stopped, like we were both frozen in place. The silence between us stretched, heavy and thick. I didn't mean for you to find out like this," Emily finally whispered, her voice cracking as she stepped back. I took a step forward, needing to hear it from her, needing to hear her say the words, the truth that had been hiding for so long. "You didn't mean for me to find out? You think that changes anything?" She looked away then, her eyes wet with tears. "I never wanted to hurt you, Jacob. I didn't. I got lost." I shook my head, the anger and pain rising inside me like a tidal wave. "Lost? How could you get lost, Emily? How could you let this happen? How could you do this to us?" Her shoulders trembled, but she still wouldn't meet my eyes. I wanted answers, but all I got was silence, and the feeling that everything I had trusted, everything I had built with her, was crumbling to dust in front of me. "I never stopped loving you," she whispered finally. "But somewhere along the way I made mistakes. I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know how to come back." I felt a sharp pain in my chest, a mix of betrayal and heartbreak. "You don't get to just say that. You don't get to take it all back. You've been lying to me, Emily." And in that moment, I knew we weren't the same anymore. We never would be. The weight of the silence in the room was unbearable. Emily's words hung in the air like an unspoken confession, but they didn't feel like enough. I needed more. I needed the truth, the whole truth. And I needed it now, because the longer we danced around it, the deeper the wound became. Her face was pale, her eyes red from tears that wouldn't stop falling. The mask she had worn for so long was gone now, but the damage was done. There was nothing left between us but the raw truth, the hurt we had both been avoiding for so long. "Tell me everything," I demanded, my voice tight with a mixture of rage and heartbreak. "How long? How long have you been doing this?" She looked away, her hands wringing together in front of her. She knew she couldn't lie anymore. She knew I had the answers already, but I needed her to admit it. I needed her to take the weight of her actions, to stop hiding behind excuses. "It started a year ago," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I never meant for it to happen. It was just one night, one mistake. But then it became more. A year, a whole year. I felt my stomach churn, the nausea rising in my throat. How could she? How could she have been carrying this secret for so long, living this double life while pretending everything was fine? And worse, how could she expect me to just accept it? "You were sleeping with him while I was working, while I was trying to build our future," I said, my voice low, steady with the weight of disbelief. "You lied to me, Emily. You kept it hidden. You betrayed me." She nodded slowly, tears falling freely now. "I know. I'm so sorry, Jacob. I never meant for you to find out like this, but I didn't know how to stop." I shook my head, trying to stop the overwhelming sense of betrayal that was threatening to suffocate me. "You didn't know how to stop? You didn't know how to tell me?" I laughed bitterly, the sound foreign in my own ears. "I trusted you. I gave you everything. And you threw it all away for him, for some affair." She reached out then, her hand trembling as she tried to touch mine. "It wasn't like that. It wasn't just about him. It was about me, too. About the things I lost, the parts of myself that I couldn't get back. But I couldn't listen anymore. My heart was breaking too fast, too violently for me to even process what she was saying. The woman I had loved for so long, the woman I thought I knew, was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. "I can't do this anymore, Emily," I whispered, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "I can't keep living in this lie." She gasped, her face crumpling with anguish. "No, please, Jacob, I love you. I made a mistake, but I need you. I want to fix this." But it was too late. The truth had already ripped us apart. There was nothing left to fix, no glue strong enough to hold us together. I had been broken, and now I needed to walk away. The days that followed were a blur of confusion and numbness. I didn't know what I was doing, where I was going. I had spent so many years wrapped up in the illusion of a perfect marriage, but now it was gone. Emily's apology, her desperate pleas, had meant nothing in the face of the truth. The betrayal had shattered me, and there was no quick fix for the cracks that ran deep. But somewhere in the quiet of that pain, I realized I couldn't stay there. I couldn't live in the anger and hurt forever. I had to find a way to heal, to move forward, even if I didn't know where that path would lead. I took small steps at first. I focused on the business, the only thing that still felt solid. There, amidst the chaos of construction sites and designs, I found a fleeting sense of purpose. It wasn't much, but it was something to cling to. At night, when the weight of the day bore down on me, I would lie awake, my mind racing through memories of better days. I thought of Ethan, of Madeline. They were the light in all this darkness, the reason I had to keep going. Their faces, their laughter, reminded me that life didn't end with betrayal. There was more, much more, even if I couldn't see it yet. I started running again, something I had abandoned years ago. The rhythm of my feet pounding against the pavement became a kind of therapy, a release for the anger, the sadness, the confusion. It was during those early morning runs that I realized the most important thing. I had to forgive myself. I had to stop blaming myself for everything that went wrong. I wasn't the one who had betrayed my heart. The healing wasn't easy. It wasn't a straight line, and I wasn't sure if I would ever feel whole again. But with each step, each moment of clarity, I began to feel like I was slowly finding myself again. And maybe, just maybe I could rebuild the life I had lost. It had been months since I had faced the truth, since I had let go of the life I thought I knew. The hurt was still there, a quiet echo in my chest, but I was beginning to find pieces of myself again, pieces I hadn't known I had lost. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at work, I stopped by a small cafe in town, something to clear my mind, to reset before heading home. As I sat down with my coffee, I saw her, Sophia. Her name was a whisper on my lips the first time I heard it, though I didn't know it yet. She was sitting at a table by the window, her head buried in a book, her coffee forgotten, steam curling from the top. Something about the way she seemed so absorbed, so lost in her own world made me pause. I couldn't explain it, I just felt drawn to her like a pull I couldn't resist. I wasn't looking for love. Hell, I didn't know if I was even ready to feel that way again. But when she looked up, our eyes met, and there was a soft understanding between us. An unspoken connection that made me feel a little less alone in the world. We started talking that night about books, about life, about the small things that made us who we were. I felt something stir inside me that had long been dormant. It wasn't intense, it wasn't rushed, but it was real. There was something about her warmth, her kindness, that reminded me of the person I once was. Sophia didn't try to fix me. She didn't try to erase the pain. She simply listened, offering her quiet support without judgment. It was in those small, simple moments with her that I began to realize that I could love again, that maybe, just maybe, I could trust again. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden light across the quiet park where we sat. It felt like the world was holding its breath, waiting for something. Maybe it was waiting for me, for us. I had been here before, on the edge of something new, but this time felt different. This time there was a quiet sense of peace that I hadn't known in a long while. Sophia sat beside me, her hand resting in mine, the simple weight of it grounding me in this moment. I didn't have all the answers, and I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid. I had come so far from the man I had been when Emily and I first met, the man who thought love was something that could never be broken. I had learned that love wasn't perfect. It wasn't always fair or kind, but it was still worth believing in. Sophia had shown me that. She had been there when I was at my lowest, not with grand gestures or words of wisdom, but with quiet presence. She understood that healing took time, that moving forward didn't mean forgetting. It meant learning to trust again, one small step at a time. As I looked at her, I realized that this wasn't just a new chapter for me. It was a new beginning, a chance to rebuild not just my heart but my life. The scars from the past would always be there, but they didn't have to define me. I could move forward, and I would do it with Sophia by my side. The future felt uncertain, but for the first time in so long, I was ready to face it. This was where my story began anew. What do you think of Jacob's journey through betrayal and healing? From which region are you watching this video? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications to follow all our latest stories. And be sure to check out more heartwarming tales by clicking here on the end screen.